Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. We are continuing with our series, The Wandering Jew, Mystical Musings and Inspirational Insights from Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg. We are going to finish tonight the chapter called Heart and Soul. And the subchapter that we did all of last week was Selflessness. And we have just a few little ones left from Selflessness. And then we're going to continue with a good eye. Still part of the Heart and Soul chapter. And the subchapter is a good eye. So let's finish up the Selflessness. So Rav Ginsburg says like this. It's called selflessness and happiness. In other words, what's the connection between selflessness and being in a state of joy? One second. There. So he says like this. The divine sphirot of Chochmah and Binah, wisdom and understanding, are referred to in Kabbalah as father and mother, respectively. Chochmah, on the right side of the sphirot, is always termed or related to as Abba, father, male, masculine, and the left side is Binah, the feminine, and understanding, and called the mother. They are called two companions that never part. Anytime you talk about Chochmah and Binah in Kabbalah, you have this expression from the Zohar that they're like two beloveds that never part. So Chochmah and Binah, the way we understand them, are the two parts of the brain, the right brain and the left brain, the right brain being a little bit more, call it creative, intuitive, and the left more analytical, logical. But they're called two beloveds that never part. Then he says a beautiful thing in the way we understand in Kabbalah, the world and all in it are their offspring. Meaning, Kabbalistically, everything is coming from Chochmah and Binah, father and mother. Just like children come from father and mother, everything in the world, in a sense, comes from the coupling, the unification of Chochmah and Binah. So one of the things we say every day in our prayers is, Kulam b'Chochmah asita. You made everything in wisdom, in Chochmah. And it's explained in Kabbalah and Chassidut. After that, there's like a bracket. And we read it, you made everything in wisdom into Binah, into understanding. In other words, again, there's no separating between, let's say, the right brain and the left brain. And today we even know that they're so connected that the right brain is ruling over the left part of the body, and the left brain is ruling over the right part of the body. You can't divide them. So you can't divide Chochmah and Binah. And when we say you made everything in wisdom, so today, we call it scientifically, we know that physics and quantum physics have taken us beyond matter, and that everything now is considered encoded information. That's what everything is, encoded information. And that information, from a Jewish point of view, a Kabbalistic point of view, is what Chochmah is. You made everything in wisdom, meaning that the plan, the blueprint, is in the Sfirot of Chochmah and Binah, and their unity gives birth to everything in the physical universe and the spiritual universes. So he continues. In the soul, Chochmah is experienced as selflessness, while Binah is experienced as happiness. Anyone who has my book, The Sfirot and Meditation, knows that all of the usual names that we call the Sfirot, each one of them has an inner dynamic, which is just as important as the more outward expression. So when we go through the Sfirot, Keter, Chochmah, Binah, Dat, Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut, each one of them has an inner motivational dynamic in the world in general, and especially in the soul. So the inner dimension of wisdom is selflessness. Remember, this little piece is called selflessness and happiness. And the inner dimension of Binah is joy, happiness. So here he's now just one more sentence, but he puts them together. A drop of selflessness impregnates a wealth of happiness. I'll say that again. A drop of selflessness impregnates a wealth of happiness. Now, we said Chochmah is considered the father figure, and Binah is the mother figure. And when we talked about the coupling of Chochmah and Binah, they can never be separated. So we're told further, as a Kabbalistic metaphor, that Chochmah is like the seed, and it is impregnated in the womb of Binah. So Chochmah is this flash of insight, an epiphany, a seeing a vision clearly. But then it needs to be developed. It needs to be fleshed out. It needs to be brought into reality. And that's why it must enter into Binah in order to be able to do that. But here he just says a beautiful thing. In other words, a little bit of selflessness brings a lot of joy and happiness. So sometimes we might hear the idea of being egoless or selfless. You could ask, well, what's so joyous about that? Or being humble. But here we're saying in a Jewish way, being in a state of selflessness is a tremendous joy to the soul. Because we're used to having the ego kind of consider itself king all the time, ruling the roost. But we're told the more selfless that we are, the more we're connected to a more divine consciousness and not an egocentric consciousness. Even in a more universal way, we could talk about being connected to a more all-encompassing universal consciousness instead of an egocentric consciousness. But the result will be joy in the soul. And that's why the joy of Binah, remember in Hebrew, the word for meditation is hitbonenut, from the word Binah. And so to enter into any kind of meditation, whether it's a long meditation or, as I've been trying to teach for years in Judaism, a meditation could be 10 seconds. Could be 5 seconds. It's just a matter of focused awareness. And so that brings a tremendous joy when we can enter into this kind of selfless kind of consciousness, it brings a lot of joy. And so that, Kabbalistically, is the unification of Chochmah and Binah. So just to complete this, I'll say something you've probably heard me say before, but it's such a gem. This is a perfect place to say it, that the first verse of the Torah, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So usually in English, we translate Bereshit, in the beginning. And there are three different Aramaic, call it translations, but really translations and explanations of the words. And two of the three choose an Aramaic word that is very close to the idea of in the beginning. But the third one says, with wisdom, God created the heavens and the earth. In other words, he translates in the beginning as meaning in the beginning of wisdom. So here, when we're saying that, Ginsburg is saying that from Chochmah and Binah, the unity of Chochmah and Binah, comes everything. So here we see it literally in the first word of the Torah. Now another, we'll call it a numerical gem, is if you take the entire Gematria, the numerical value of the first sentence of the Torah, Bereshit bara Elokim et Shemaim v'et haaretz, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Altogether, it's 2,701. What is the significance of that number? It is a triangle number, meaning it's a triangle of 73. What does that mean? 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5, all the way up to plus 70 plus 71 plus 72 plus 73 equals 2,701. So in other words, it's called the triangle of 73 equals 2,701. What's the significance of 73? It equals Chochmah, wisdom. So here we see engraved in the first sentence of the Torah this idea, what we say every day in our prayers, Kulam b'chochmah asita. You made everything with wisdom. And again, as I said, scientifically now, this wisdom that we're talking about is encoded information, just like the DNA is encoded information. But now physics, quantum physics, is saying that the atom, the particles, the neutron, the proton, the electron, they're not things, they're not entities. They're actually wave functions of encoded information. So this is just in between the lines of what Rav Ginsburg is saying. And I'm just going to say it again. A drop of selflessness impregnates a wealth of happiness. Everyone should remember that. Everyone should remember that. The more selfless our consciousness is, actually, the happier we all will be. Okay. So now, for those who are new to the series, this book is a compilation of tweets and blogs from Rav Ginsburg. So the next one is a tweet. I remember tweets 15 years ago when these were recorded, you were only allowed like a very short amount of characters. So here he says, arrogance is nothing but foolishness. The greater you believe yourself to be, the dumber you are. Intelligence knows its limits. So he's actually basing this on a statement in the Gemara that the greater someone thinks they are, the smaller they really are. And the smaller one thinks they are, the greater they are. Now, again, we're not talking about smaller in self-esteem or self-worth. Again, we're talking about the ego and selflessness. So the more we give ego the rein to run our lives, Rav Ginsburg says that is foolishness. But the more we attempt to have a humble, selfless kind of consciousness, then really the smarter that we are, the more intelligent we are. Okay, now we're going to go to the last one. And we actually did this already, but we're going to do it again because it's so important. And before I start, last week, almost everything we learned included the word in English of nothing. This idea that selflessness is this idea of being in a state of nothingness. But we explained very clearly that when we say nothing in English, it doesn't mean the same thing in Kabbalah and Chassidut. Nothing just means putting your ego in order and allowing yourself to have a more expanded consciousness that is not ego-centric or ego-driven. So Rav Ginsburg says like this: when Rabbi Shneur Zalman wrote his classic work, the Tanya, he experienced every word that he wrote. Now, this is seems like a very simple statement here, but let's say the same thing with prayer. There's a way that we pray we read the words, but then there's a way we pray, even if we're reading the words, that we're experiencing the words that we're reading. And this might sound obvious, but it's not obvious at all, because I have to say, most people, and I'll include myself, when we are davening from a text, we are saying the words, but it doesn't mean that we're experiencing them. That's really a whole different experience, a whole different level. So here he's saying that when Shneur Zalman was writing, he wasn't writing just from his intellect. He was writing and experiencing what he was writing at the same time. So Rav Ginsburg says when he wrote the word nothing, again in Hebrew it's Ayin, Aleph Yud Nun. So when he wrote the word Ayin, he was Ayin. He was nothing. And again, the nothing doesn't mean no thing. It actually means everything in potential. How can you be nothing and write the word nothing at the same time? So now Rav Ginsburg brings really a very, very important paradox that applies to all of us. We want to be more selfless. We want to have more of a God consciousness, a pure consciousness, a universal consciousness. And yet, I am the one who's aware of being selfless. So how does that work? And remember, we learned that the word for nothing, Ayin, the same letters rearranged is the word for Ani, I, the ego. So Rav Ginsburg is really asking a classic question here. How can you be nothing and write the word nothing at the same time? Because if you didn't have an ego, you wouldn't be able to act in this world. the ego is not a bad thing. It gives us the ability to think, to speak, and to act. But the question is, how are we thinking? How are we speaking? How are we acting? From what level of consciousness? So he answers, only if together with being nothing, you are also something. So this is really important. We're at the end. We've now been learning for 2 weeks about selflessness. But here he says, only if together with being nothing, you are also something. So we've talked about paradox all the time. So here's just another paradox. How can I be an I? How can I be a forceful person in this world, an accomplished person in this world, make a mark, get things done, and be totally humble and selfless at the same time? So he's saying you can do it. You can do it, but you have to be aware of a paradox that needs to be integrated, that we can be an actor in this world with a lot of will, a lot of ratzon, and acting from the ego, and yet be selfless and humble and existentially lowly and understand our place vis-a-vis God and in the universe. And they don't have to be a contradiction. The person that we've always pointed out is Moshe. The Torah itself says that he was the most humble person on the face of the earth. And what a powerful leader he was at the same time. And the same thing with David HaMelech. David said about himself, "Hayitim shafel be'enai." I'm very lowly in my own eyes. And yet he's king of Israel. Tremendous warrior, a tremendous leader. It doesn't have to be a contradiction. And this applies to all of us. So Rav Ginsburg continues, but how can you be nothing and something at the same time? So first he asks the question. First, how can you be nothing and something at the same time? And then he says, but you have to be nothing and something at the same time. So now he says, Rabbi Shneur Zalman knew how. Now, the next thing is an amazing statement from Rav Ginsburg. He says, I don't. If you have a clue, let me know. So here, this is kind of the medium is the message. Rav Ginsburg is teaching us the real profound depths of understanding the human psyche, how to deal with the paradox of something and nothing, of ego and humbleness, of ego and selflessness. And yet he's saying he knows it can be done, and he knows the formula, because you have to be both at the same time. But nonetheless, he said, maybe the Balatanya knew exactly how to do it. I don't. If you have a clue, let me know. My feeling is that Rav Ginsburg here is applying selflessness in the extreme, and honesty also. In other words, he has just walked us through different ways to understand the idea of selflessness and how to reach it, how to strive for it. But he's also being honest that he doesn't claim to have the exact formula that everyone can follow. We all have to, in a certain way, struggle with this, try to perfect it, and it's 24/7. Our ego is there 24/7, and our attempt to reach higher consciousness should also be there 24/7. And so somehow we have to learn to balance these two important parts of the human psyche. So now he ends this whole section of selflessness with the following statement. Modesty is the way you move, not just the way you dress. Movement is generally unconscious. Don't be self-conscious, just humble and natural. He's saying a whole lot here. In Hebrew, the word for modesty is Tzniut, and it's a very, very big issue among observant Jews, that usually we think of women and Tzniut, but it's not true. It's men just as much. And it's usually connected to the way we dress. In other words, the more skin we try to show in a certain way, the less modest it's considered. And of course, we know in Hollywood, the Western world, the more flesh you can show, like, I don't know what, whatever. But modesty has a lot to do with dress. But here he says, it's not just the way you dress, it's the way that you move. You can move through the world in an arrogant way, or you can move through the world in a more flowing way. So he says movement is generally unconscious. When we're walking, we're usually not all that conscious of every step that we take. We're walking, we're moving, we're going from one place to the other. And usually our feet know what to do. We don't really think about it all that much. So he says, don't be self-conscious, just humble and natural. So in other words, he's saying that in a certain way, in a real sense, if you take away peer pressure and culturally correct and all of that, if we think about it, the way people dressed for thousands of years is very, very different than the way that many people dress today. So he's saying that there's something natural about a person and their own essential intrinsic sense of modesty. The way that we dress, but more the way that we move through the world. So he's encouraging us that we could be the strongest leader in the world, but we should do it in a humble way, and it should come natural. So with that, we finished the section on selflessness. Now we're going to a whole new section called a good eye. So he begins with a tweet, short. When rectified, the eyes not only see the superficial reality before them, they penetrate beyond it and observe reality's inner essence. So what does he mean here? So in one sense, we could ask a question like, how does that work? The eye it's a physical way that we see things. How does the eye perceive between the superficial and the deeper meanings? So it's really not the eyes at all. The eyes become a symbol of the way that we look at the world is coming from our consciousness. So that's really what he's saying. The way that we look at the world, we could look at the world, at situations, at people, at ourselves, at God, in a very superficial way. Or we can see deeper. But again, the deeper that it's not literally coming from the physical eyes. And yet, what we're told, there's an expression that the eyes are the window to the world. It's a window for our consciousness to be able to perceive what is out there and then interpret it either on a superficial level or a deeper level. So that's how he starts this idea of a good eye. Obviously, he's saying that it's not really sufficient just to see the world and reality on a superficial level. We always have to be looking for what's going on in a deeper level. Okay. So the first one is called perfect vision. Besides our physical sense of sight, we have a spiritual sense of sight. So that's what I was trying to get at, that the physical sense of sight allows us to have a spiritual sense of sight. The spiritual rectification of sight requires two complementary abilities: seeing the divine providence in our lives and seeing the good in others. So this is a very important statement he's saying here, that what does it mean to spiritually rectify your sight? So he's saying it requires two abilities. One, to see the divine providence in our lives, and to see goodness in other people, in situations, in reality. Divine providence, then he puts in parentheses, anyone who has the book, we're on page 92. I should have said that. We're on page 92. Divine providence, in contrast to what appears to be pure chance or deterministic causality, is often alluded to by the term synchronicity. I shall see God in the land of the living. This is a quote. I shall see from Psalms. I shall see God in the land of the living, meaning that I shall express thanksgiving to God for his providence over me. There is more to what happens in our lives than meets the external eye. There is involvement from the outside. If there is involvement, then someone cares, and that someone is God. He cares for our well-being, both physically and spiritually. He is constantly working miracles in our lives, miracles that for the most part we do not see. So here again, he's saying if we had eyes to see, we would see the ongoing miracles, especially just that we're alive, just that the earth contains the factors, the natural laws that allow us to live at all. So every moment in a certain way is totally miraculous. So here, though, but he says something really, really quite deep here. He says, there's more to what happens in our lives than meets the eye. There's involvement from the outside. In other words, again, this happens to be connected to the ego that we were talking about. If someone is completely egocentric, this person is the center of the world, and everything is emanating from this person. It's as if everything revolves around the person. When we have a broader view, then we can see that there's things happening from the outside also. And here what he's saying, what he means is things happening from the outside. This is God's providence. We have free will. and we have to exercise it. But if that's all we see is that we have free will and we don't recognize any divine providence, then we are missing a whole lot of what actually is going on. Rav Ginsburg continues, the second part of rectifying our inner sense of sight is concentrating solely on the good in others. Every human being contains both good and bad. We must learn to imitate the Almighty, who, although he sees our iniquity, does not concentrate on it, but rather concentrates on our good. This is referred to as possessing a good eye. Remember, this whole section is called a good eye, the source of both receiving blessing and blessing others. The more we observe the good in others, the more we bring out their latent good. So here, again, he's being honest. Every person has good and not so good. Every person has lots of positive attributes and certainly negative attributes. Everyone in the world does good, and everyone makes mistakes and does and says and thinks things that they shouldn't have, one would rather have not. The question is, us as observers, what are we concentrating on? On the good in others or the not so good? So here he's saying we should take our clue from God. God sees everything. And he can see a person just stumbling through life, making all kinds of mistakes, wrong decisions, sometimes very selfish and negative decisions. But he's saying God is always trying to look at the good. And so we should learn from that. The more we observe the good in others, the more we bring out their latent good. We know this very, very much from teachers and students, that the teachers can do miracles with difficult students by seeing their potential and having the other person see it just as well. This could be the troublemaker in class. It's usually the troublemakers that have the greatest potential, right? Oh, I see. Okay. Okay, Jerry's in. So the more we observe the good in others, the more we bring out their latent good. And the same thing with ourselves. The more we're down on ourselves, then the less potential we can exhibit in the world, we can express. Not being blind to our faults. It's very important to recognize our faults and try to fix them. But if that's all we're concentrating on, then our potential lies dormant. Okay, so that's the end of the first one, called perfect vision, meaning we should try to see others the way God sees others. And he doesn't quote this, but in the Song of Songs, Shir Shirim, it's the male in the story is an allegory for God, and the female is for Am Yisrael. And at one point, the masculine says about his beloved, Ein mum ba, there's no blemish in her. So the question is asked, this is God speaking about the people of Israel. Well, God is very aware of our blemishes. God is very well of our failings, our every place that we fall short, our dissents, our wrongdoings. So what does it mean? Ein mumba. So it's explained that here God is looking at the essence of the Jewish people. And actually, last week we learned on Gimel Tammuz that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, so he was saying that we need to see the good in others. We need to see the good in every Jew and in every human being. And Rav Ginsburg explained that the Rebbe also was very aware there's a lot of evil in the world. Nonetheless, the Lubavitcher Rebbe felt that in essence, people are good. In essence, in a general way, humanity is good. So the more that we see that, first of all, the happier we'll be, and the more we can help others bring out their positive attributes. So now a short statement. He says, all of us want our lives to be good. Pray for others. Their good is your good. And then he quotes from the sages, he that prays for others is answered first. In other words, that praying for others is a basic belief that their good is our good. And here it's a little tricky because this was it's learned from Avram Avinu, that when Avimelech takes Sarah, and then God afflicts his household and the whole people, that no one could give birth. And then Avimelech returns Sarah. And it says that Avram prayed for Avimelech and they were healed. And the very next verse says, and then Sarah gave birth at a very elderly age, miraculously. And so the sages learn from this, when you pray for others, you will be answered first. But the trick is, you can't do it in a selfish way. I'm going to pray for others, so I'll get answered first. I don't really care about the others, but this is the formula. I pray for others, I get answered first. No, of course, that's not what they meant. They meant sincerely, when you pray for others, that many times if you are in need of the same thing, that you will be answered first or as well. Okay, now the next one is called spiritual stereoscopy. Hopefully I said that right. Why did God create us with two eyes? He asks the question. The straightforward explanation is so that we may have stereoscopy, meaning depth of vision. That somehow having two eyes allows us to have depth of vision. But there is also a Hasidic explanation, that we may see the good in others with our right eye, the eye of loving kindness, and see our own faults that require rectification with our left eye, the eye of judgment. So here already we could ask, well, we have two eyes. The right eye, we see good in others, and the left eye, we see what's lacking in others. He says, no, that's not how it is. That we have two eyes so we can see the good in others, and the left eye that we should see where we need to improve, not the negative of other people, but where we need to improve. This is a necessary state of balance. Without recognizing the negative in ourselves, we cannot appreciate the good in others and vice versa. So this is also psychologically a very deep thing he's saying here. In other words, to to see good in others, we have to see the negative in ourselves, because if we don't, then we're going to see the negative in others also. But if we see the negative in ourselves, we'll understand others much better than if we didn't. With regard to divine providence, we also need two eyes. With our right eye, we see the revealed wonders that God performs for our benefit. And with our left eye, we see how things that happen to us and do not appear good are also for our eternal good. In fact, the latter originate from a higher level of good than the revealed wonders. So here again, he's explaining it in a way that is a higher level of logic, because we're taking two like opposites, but we're not applying it. One we're applying to others, and the other to ourselves, instead of both to others. And so here with divine providence, with one eye, we see the great wonders that God does for us, the kindnesses, and we show appreciation and gratitude. But then there are many things in life that are not going the way that we hope that they would, and lead to questions. God, I don't understand. Why am I going through this? Why are you doing this to me, as it were? So here he says the right eye is to see the wonders, and the left eye is to see that even those things that we're experiencing, try to look through them and see that ultimately they're for our good. And this is very, very connected to something in, here in Eretz Yisrael, it was last week's Parsha, Chukat. Outside of Israel, it's the coming Shabbos, and that's the story of the burning snakes. The people spoke evil speech, lashon hara. Why don't we have water? Why we don't like this manna? We don't like where we are. Why did you take us out of Egypt? The whole thing. And what happened is burning snakes came, because who is the first person to use their speech to trick someone? That was the snake in the Garden of Eden. And so God sent burning snakes, and people were dying. And so the people came and said to Moshe, pray for us. And then God said, make a snake and put it on a staff, and tell the people, if you look up at the snake, then you will be healed. Then you will be healed. So Rav Ginsburg explains that this idea is the illness, meaning the healing is in the illness itself. And so since they were being bitten by burning snakes, the healing had to come through taking that energy. It's like a vaccination or homeopathy, where you take a little bit of the disease and you put it in a person, and then they can make the antibodies in order to fight off the real illness if it would ever come. The same thing with homeopathy. Likes cure likes. And so here what he's saying, with the right eye, we look at the miracles that God is doing for us. And with the left eye, those things that are not going the way we would like, and we're suffering, and there's pain there, that we learn to look through it. That's the idea of looking at the snake but the idea was having to look up, meaning beyond the snake, and to see that the healing will come when you can take the illness and turn it into the healing. And that's why in Hebrew, the word for being sick is cholah. An illness is called a machala, and it comes from the letters chet lamed. The word for weakness is chalash, chet lamed. The word for a corpse is a halal, chet lamed. And yet that same root of chet lamed means chayal, a soldier, someone who's strong. Eshet chayil, a woman of valor. And so Rav Ginsburg explains that the healing is in recognizing that it's in the illness itself, that the illness is coming as a wake-up call. It's to tell us that there's something really off in the body that needs attention. So all of that is implicit in what he's saying here. He continues, our faith that all that befalls us is for our eternal good, for all comes from God, who is the essence of good, transforms the apparent bad into revealed good. Now, obviously, this is not easy to do, but it is doable. And I think everyone's had the experience where something not good is happening. But at a certain point, it clicks in our mind, this is happening because of X, Y, or Z. And I can see that this is a lesson that I have to learn. And that if I can get through this, I'll be the stronger for it. And then there are other times that things happen to us and we just can't see that. We just can't get to what's the goodness that is hidden here. It is a challenge. Ultimately, both eyes become one. Now that's the goal, is to see everything ultimately is coming from the goodness of God. As hard as it is sometimes to accept that and to integrate it and to believe it, when we can do it, it makes life completely different. Because then everything isn't, good and bad. The Eitzadat Tovara, either everything's good or bad. We start to see even in the not so good, if we, like looking at the snake, looking beyond it. It was the snakes that bit us. Now we have to learn what we have to learn and see that there was a reason for it. And once we figure out the reason, we'll see the goodness. Ultimately, both eyes become one. In Kabbalah, this phenomenon is referred to as reaching the level of the Ancient One. It's called Atika Kadisha, of whom it is said, Atika Kadisha is in Keter. And we've talked many, many times that in this world, what we experience as paradox, in the upper worlds is oneness. Just like the triangle, you have the 2 points, and then they come to a oneness. So for God, in this place called Keter or Atika, all opposites are unified. So that's the expression in Kabbalah, is that there is no left in the Ancient One. All is right. In other words, there isn't this duality of good and bad, tov v'ra. That was the whole problem of eating of the Eitzadat tov v'ra, because now everything becomes bipolar. Everything becomes opposites. And so it is with regard to observing ourselves and others. Ultimately, all becomes right. Left and right all unify. Upon rectifying our own bad, we no longer need to look at ourselves at all. We only see the good in everything, the right eye, including ourselves as an inseparable part of everything. For everything reflects God, the Creator. So we have to, this is like Rav Ginsburg said about the selflessness. If anyone has an idea of how to do this, please tell me. I would like to know. In other words, what he's saying here is not easy. But when it works, it makes everything different in our life. If everything that happens to us we immediately categorize as good or bad, then that's the kind of world that we're going to experience. But if we have this idea that even the bad that is happening, there must be some good hidden here, and I need to find it. I need to identify it. That changes the experience completely. And many of us have this experience all the time. Something not so positive is happening, but we're able to stop, breathe a little bit, and say to ourselves, Gam ze yavor, this too will pass. Not such a big deal. I wish it didn't happen this way, but there's much more important things in life. And we've all had that experience. And then there are other times where something is happening and it just drives us down and we just don't know how to get out of it. But here, Rav Ginsburg is obviously encouraging us to look for the good in others, look for the good in ourselves, look for the good in the good, and look for the good in the initial experience of what appears not to be good. So that's a good place to stop. Next week we'll continue. There's a lot of really, really good things about a good eye. These are not small matters. That when we can learn some of the secrets of how to see the good and not be driven down by what our initial experience is of bad, and it makes a complete difference of being happy or not happy, of living a positive, forward-looking, happy life, or being constantly driven down by what we want to immediately identify as being bad. I bless all of us to give much thought to what we learned tonight and to be able, as much as possible, despite the challenges, the more we can turn bitter into sweet and darkness into light, the happier we all will be.